It's such a beautiful day and such a special day. And I'd like to welcome Daryl Roberts. Have I... Sorry? Is it? Okay. No stress. And I also want to welcome Gerrit and his beautiful wife, Lucille, from... I'm always so uncertain, is it Robertson or Bonnievale? Or Robbierville? It's lovely seeing you guys. Good seeing you. Their daughter's been baptized this morning, as well as Coulson. He's been baptized this morning, so it's a very exciting morning for all of us on Father's Day. We have studied the life of Joseph this last couple of months, and on a Wednesday evening, and it's been an amazing, amazing journey with so much richness, so many nuances in the text that really helps us just have a completely different view of how God works in the lives of those who honor him. And especially while I was praying about the Father's Day, I remember a lesson that we stopped with on 2-3 weeks ago, where he spoke about the last part of Joseph's life. And this text really became very meaningful for me in chapter 50, verse 22. It says the following in verse 19, Joseph said to them, "Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done and saving of many lives. Then don't be afraid. I'll provide for you and your children." And he assured them and spoke kindly to them. Joseph stayed in Egypt along with all his family, his father's family. He lived 110 years, and here's the passage that really struck me. He says, "And saw the third generation of Ephraim's children, and also saw the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, were placed at birth on Joseph's knee." There is something to be said in the life of godly men and godly fathers. We know the life of Joseph is riddled with traps and nuances of betrayal, and those come across all of our paths in some shape or form, and sometimes from the most unlikable or unexpected areas of life, but they do happen. But we learn so much in the life of this wonderful man. But this morning I want to step out of his life a little bit and just tell you that when I started praying about this, the life of Job came to mind. The lives of so many fathers all through Scripture just came flooding into my mind. And then I realized that the story of fatherhood is a far greater narrative than what we would like to claim that it to be. This morning I want to ask fathers, but especially also younger men if you're not married yet. I want to ask you the following. When you become a father, or if you are a father, what do you dream for your children? What do you dream for them as being the protector, the provider, the shepherd for the children? What do you dream for yourself as being the one who holds the family in the wonderful cocoon of spirituality as they follow God? And as a man, let me ask you a question. Are you a source of great encouragement to your children and to your family as you navigate the complexities of life? What do you dream of that God and you and God alone have placed before your door that you have to fulfill in this life for your children? Not only for your children, but also for the grander and greater community of faith. You see, so often we think, well, if I'm a great dad, that's about it. It's not true. When you're a Christian, you become part of a community of faith, and you become enlisted by God to play an active role in his community. Let me ask you, what causes you to sit up at night, focused on what God has given you to do, and study meticulously, chasing every bit of detail, that when you sit down and digest and actually rewrite whatever it needs to that God has placed on your heart, you know for a fact that you are doing it because God has placed a calling on your life that is exclusively yours and nobody else's. When you look at your children and you watch your children having babies, what goes through your mind? This past year was a monumental year for my family. Sue and I were blessed to be in the States, and I was at a conference which I'm so grateful to have seen. 10,000 people worshiping together on a Sunday morning. It's a picture we don't see in this country except in Venda when we see the Africa lectureships, upward of 3,500 to 5,000 people worshiping together. But one of the things that struck me that particular time was that there was an incredible involvement of children, and that was great. And we were having lunch in one of the in the guest rooms, and as I was sitting down having something to eat, in walked Sue, my daughter, the two grandchildren, and Hannah that was just born. I have a photograph that was sent to me, but I'll remember that day for the rest of my life. Hannah had been born, I think, about 2 weeks just prior. And Sue and them plotted and planned to, because I was only going to see them after the weekend, that they were going to take a drive up, which is like a 3-hour drive, I think, Susan? 3-hour drive to Nashville, and they were going to surprise me. And boy, did they surprise me. I must be honest with you, I saw nobody else in that room except Hannah. I took Hannah in my hand, and she fitted into my hands. And I held her, and I just sobbed. I just sobbed. I cried. And the reason I did, because it reminded me of the first day that I held my daughter in my hands. I remember that day so vividly, where Sue was in hospital, and Virginia was sitting there in the waiting room, and I said to her, we're about to have a baby now. And that day I was sitting in the room, and Dr. Ruiz, I still remember his name, was the gynecologist on duty. And he asked Sue if she wants an epidural, and he stuck an aerial needle, probably this long, in my wife's back. And he said to me, would you like to sit and watch while I do the epidural? And I'm like, hey man, cowboys don't cry. Do what you need to do. I stood there and watched how he inserted this massive injection needle. And I felt the cold of the back, on my back of the hospital wall. And that got me upright again. I think something tripped me. But the reason I'm talking about this is that there's something that stirs in the heart of a father and of a young man that one day will have children and have a family and look after his family. Let me ask you, what do you envision for your children to inherit one day? Are you chasing to give them an inheritance? Are you chasing to give them a legacy? A legacy that's got nothing to do with you, but a legacy that would be a substrate for them to build their lives on. That their lives will not be on the shaky ground of what you can provide and this world can erode and steal, but that God himself is that substrate, and that they will never, ever find that their household will plummet into oblivion. I love the picture of Thessalonians, where Paul writes to the church and he says, we were gentle among you like a nursing mother taking care of her own children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our lives, because you had become so very dear to us. For you remember, brothers, our labor and toil, and we worked night and day, that we might not be a burden to you or any of you. While we proclaim to you the gospel of God, you are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. For you know how, like fathers like a father with his children, we exhorted each one of you and encouraged you and charged you to walk in a manner worthy of God, who calls you into his own kingdom and glory. There is a calling on the life of each father. And you know, brethren, if I can be very honest with you, and I love what Juan says, is that, you know, everyone can be a critic. In fact, everyone can bring a child into this world, but not everyone can be a father. And here's the one picture that I want to say to all of us, is that emulating Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and also his incredible presence in our lives, helps us and inspire us to have a vision beyond our lives. The first thing I want to say is that what a father needs to do is to be able to love his children dearly. There is much to be said about being affectionate. And the word by the Greeks, what they would have heard was that you are affectionately desirous, in verse 8. In other words, he says, I love you so much. I care for you so much. I feel so strongly about you. When I saw Hannah for the first time, and I looked up, the next face was my daughter's face. I looked her in her eye and I said, thank you for giving us this wonderful gift. I said, I love you so much because you're my first child. And I thank you. You see, brethren, let me ask you a question. Do you remember that day when you held your child for the first time? I remember as a father then, I had no cooking clue as to how to be a father. I had no idea. In fact, at that time, in 86, I think it is, that is the time Victoria was born. It was not fashionable for fathers to be in the hospital ward. In other words, fathers really were let outside and then you deal with the child when she arrives. But you know what? Those days of holding a baby and being able to express your love to the child was just amazing. I remember the time as a young father, I would come back home from work, working 11 to 14 hours per day, leaving early in the morning, coming home late at night, finished. And I could not wait to hold my child and to give her bottle at night. You see, brethren, the thing is that at the end of the day, we start to have that kind of affection for our child that really and truly transcends what any normal and other human relationship is. There's a cartoon strip written by Lynn. She says, the cartoonist talked about For Better or Worse. And it speaks about two people sitting on a couch. The one's a father and the other one's a daughter. And the story is that the father is sitting on the couch with his daughter, and he thinks, the little bubble on the balloon says, you know, I remember when she was so young. I held her in my arms and loved her so much. It was absolutely wonderful. Now look at her. She's all grown up. And he says, I wonder what she would think if I had to hold her in my arms again and I would love her. And then he concludes in his thinking and he says, well, I suppose if I do that now, she'd be very uncomfortable. While he was thinking that, his daughter is thinking, I wonder why Dad never hugs me anymore. You see, so often, brethren, we somehow find being affectionate and we associate that with growing up, or we don't need it anymore. Yet I know what it meant to my daughter when I held her in my arms and I loved her. Still do. You see, every hug that a child gets from their father is important. Every bit of affection a child gets from her family is important. A rereading of Luke chapter 15, the prodigal son, one often wonders about this young man, that maybe he was overindulged and he was just enabled, and that's why he felt it okay to push the envelope with his dad, literally wishing that his dad would be dead so that he'd get his inheritance and all those kind of things. And all of that might be true, but I asked the one thing was, what would have inspired that young man to come home? There was something that was so counterintuitive after you have hurt your parents so badly that still would have the courage to say that in my Father's household, this is what I can expect. And all conclusion I came to was the fact that this father must have raised his children with so much love. And it's evident that as the child was in a far country and his father was expectantly looking on the horizon to see his son coming, eventually one day the son came, and the story is that the father ran to see his son. His son was rehearsing before the time and saying, when I see my dad, I'm going to say to him, Dad, what I did to you was wrong, and I'm so sorry for what I've done. And I know, Dad, that I'll come back even as a slave because your slaves have better than I have currently. His father didn't even wait for him to finish his sentence. He threw his head on his shoulders and he cried and he hugged his son and he welcomed him back home. It tells me so much about the father's love, that he'd invested in the life of that child, that when that child had done wrong, the child knew one thing, that I can go back home. And so when we read the prodigal son from one perspective, we often see one picture. But when you reread it from a different perspective, you start to see that there is more in this than meets the eye. You see, the father wasn't interested in legalistic obedience, but it was a relationship with his son. The second thing that we must do is we need to have a strong work ethic. You see, 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 and verse 8 says, we were ready to share with you not only the gospel of God, but also our lives. He says, when we worked in Thessalonica, we didn't just stand up and preach. That would be easy. We did this far more than that. We poured our hearts and our lives into taking care of your needs. You see, brethren, here is something about a father that has a strong work ethic. A father that not only speaks about God's word with his family, but also a man that works hard for his family. You see, Jesus Christ has a specific injunction to men directly tied to his obedience to the cross. And he says to him, husbands, love your wives and give yourself for your love as Christ gave himself for the church. The idea of giving yourself is sometimes where men struggle. We can work hard and we can bring home the bacon. But when it comes to the kind of feeling that we've got to give of ourselves and be emotionally vulnerable, we really struggle there. Most women that I speak to would often say that I love my husband so much and I know that he loves me, but I wish that he would show me. And so often that's the same clarion cry from our daughters and our children that says, I wish my dad would tell me that he loved me. You see, brethren, we need to understand that there's more. Willing to sacrifice is part of being a dad. Willing to give of your time and invest time in the life of your children is so important. You see, brethren, we don't just work for a day's pay. We work because we want to serve our families. I worked as a young man working for Rob Stodel of Stodel's Nurseries. And I must be honest with you, he was a very hard taskmaster. There was many days as a young man I would like to have taken his head off. But this man taught me one thing, and he said to me the one day, he says, who do you work for? And I says, well, that's obvious, I work for you. He says, it's not the truth. You don't work for me. He says, you sell me your labor, and I pay you a price that we agreed upon. He says, you work for your family. You owe me absolutely nothing beyond your day's labor and the expertise that I pay you for. He says, your family owes you owe your family everything to make sure that they are taken care of. I tell you something, that was the greatest lessons of my life. I was a young man of 25, and I still remember that lesson to today. You see, at the end of the day, as a father, you must understand that I don't work for you. Get it through your head. This kind of nonsense that we sell people that we can say and do what we like to them in an employee-employee relationship is nonsense. People work and you work at a company to trade your skills, and you give it, you get paid for it, you take your check and you move. Your primary function and your love is for your family, because that is who you work for. You see, ultimately, we somehow think that if I invest my life into a company, that they're going to take care of me. It's nonsense. You'll be tossed the first time they come down on hard times. And all they'll say, don't take it personally, but, we've got to save the company here. Ultimately, brethren, we've all seen it. And I want to tell you now, it is a myth that you give your life to this world. Giving your life to your family, and it does not matter what people think of you. It does not matter. It matters what God thinks of you. Because if all said and done, your face and your whole life is open before a holy God and your family. And that is why it is so important that when we live lives as incredibly hard-working, good ethic people, we must learn where our loyalties are and why we do what we do. James Dobson writes, he says, we're so concerned about giving children what we didn't have when growing up that we neglect to give them what we did have. Maybe we didn't have material things, but we did have the appreciation and value of things and willingness to work for it. You see, brethren, we must understand that when we have children, we must teach them that we love them, but they must also earn what they have. So often we want to give our children what they don't have, and we weaken our children to the point that one day, one guy made a comment, he says, today, when I grew up, my fathers drove on a camel. Later on, they drove in a car. Now we drive in Maseratis and in big fancy cars. And one day my children will drive in camels. Let me tell you now, brethren, I've seen more fortunes lost than anything else. And I tell you now, I read a little bit. And I have watched the cycle of economies all over this world. And I've watched cycles of economies within the lives of people who has not understood that the fundamentals of a life that is truly empowered is the life that is built on the indelible and indestructible foundation of the Lord Jesus Christ. And if you miss that as a father, you've missed it. Being a godly father means that you live out your faith. And by that it means that 1 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 10, he says, you are witnesses, and God also, how holy and righteous and blameless was our conduct toward you believers. In other words, he's saying, I'm not just trying to be a showcase here. He says, I'm living a life that in every aspect, and you can have a look at my personal life, and you will see that. Stu Weber, in a book called Tender Warrior, speaks about this, and he says, the physical necessities of life are the simplest, easiest duties of the provisionary. A little food, a little shelter, and physical provision is done deal, but that isn't real provision. As men, we so often misplace our vision. We focus on houses and cars and stock portfolios and bank accounts and piling up stuff. And we say, if we have financial plan, if we tucked away some money for college, if we have a good life insurance policy, we are good providers. We revert to the things we can see, when in fact it's the unseen world, the world of the spirit, the world of relationships, where we ought to be majoring in our provision. Matters of character, heart, spirit, integrity, justice, humility, the kinds of things that last, the character traits that outlives a man. Stu Weber was right when he says that we must live things far greater than that. I have seen the richest men being the most scumbag men, teach their children how to disrespect authority, how to gossip, how to slander, and all those kind of things. And I can tell you now, it's payback time in society. Because your parents might tolerate it here, but society will not. You see, and those kind of things, us as parents, integrity is taught in the home, where you stop your child and you say to him, hold it. It doesn't work like that in my home. You see, brethren, a strong father lives out his belief. Make sure that those decisions that he makes are always in line with God's light. Irma Bombach made a comment and says, when I was a child, a father was like a light in the refrigerator. Everybody's house had the one, but no one really knew what either did when the door was shut. You see, when you talk about being a father, it's a little bit more than just bringing a child into this world. You see, there was a discussion between somebody that lost a father And it was a very, very great man. And the family was there, the children were there. And as they were all sitting in a room just talking about their dad, one of the questions asked, what's your overriding major memory of your dad? And they said, the major memory of my father was seeing my father kneeling next to his bed, next to my mother, and praying to God for me and my family. I want to ask you a question. Is that the guiding light of your children, memory of you? Or is it something that all they see is this person coming to complain? The fourth point I want to make, being a godly father means training your children. And by that I basically mean to be able to talk with your children and say, hey guys, we need to have a discussion. You can ask my wife and my children behind my back. When it comes to lying, you will get into trouble with me. I can tell you now, I don't tolerate a lie. I don't care who you are. If you lie, I don't care how you cut that cake, you must learn to speak the truth. Because God's truth sets us free. And John says, and he says here in 3 John, he says, I have greater joy, no greater joy than to hear my children walking in the truth. You see, brethren, sometimes when people talk the truth, they squirm and they lie and they say, that's actually not what happened. That's called projection. That's called gaslighting. When you talk the truth, you speak the truth that can stand up to eternity. I'm just going to stop there. This morning I had a lovely story that I wanted to tell you, but our time's gone. I just want to speak this morning to all of our parents and close there for fathers. Your role of a dad is so important, but I want you all to just stop and smell the roses. To prepare your children to be strong, to be courageous, to stand on their own, has still got a right to a voice and a right of existence. And the beautiful picture that I find in the book of the Bible is the fact that Jesus Christ came to give us just that and more. And so this morning we stand before God equal in the sight of an awesome God. And as a father, I pray that God will bless us because we've got many chinks in our armor. But I pray that as we walk this road together, that we will always walk side by side, being each other's greatest cheerleader as we walk into eternity, guiding our children and walking ahead of them so that they can follow in a road that is clearly defined and clearly can see the evidence of Jesus Christ in our lives. Let's stand and sing a song of encouragement.